On Christmas Day 2013, Alan Williamson rejected a gift from his neighbor, a pair of trainers and a calendar. 2 hours later, he was dead behind her front door with 29 stab wounds. Edinburgh at Christmas is magical. The Scottish capital transforms into a winter wonderland each December. The Christmas market sprawls through East Prince's Street gardens, the Ferris wheel towers over the city centre, ice skating rinks appear in St. Andrew's Square. Families walk through the historic Old Town under strings of lights, stopping for hot chocolate and mince pies. The ancient castle looks down over it all, lit up against the winter sky. Christmas Day 2013 was cold but clear. Across Edinburgh, families were gathering for holiday meals, opening presents, enjoying the one day when the city slows down and people focus on being together. In the Corstorphine neighborhood on the western edge of Edinburgh, a residential area of flats and terraced houses, Christmas morning looked like it did everywhere else, decorations in windows, the smell of turkey roasting, children playing with new toys. At a flat on Glenure Lane, 37-year-old Melissa Young had Christmas presents for her neighbor, a pair of unisex trainers, practical running shoes that anyone could wear, and a copy of the Sun newspaper's 2014 calendar, the kind with photographs of models in swimwear that the tabloid published annually. Simple gifts, the sort neighbors exchange during the holidays. Nothing expensive or elaborate, just a gesture of friendship. Her neighbor, 47-year-old Alan Williamson, lived in the same building. They'd been acquaintances for a while. Not close friends, but the kind of neighbors who saw each other regularly, said hello, perhaps borrowed sugar or accepted packages for each other. When Alan came to Melissa's flat on Christmas Day, she gave him the presents she'd bought. He looked at them, and then he rejected them. He didn't want the trainers. He didn't want the calendar. He said no thank you and tried to leave. 2 hours later, Alan Williamson was lying dead behind Melissa Young's front door, stabbed 29 times with a kitchen knife. And Melissa was on the phone to emergency services, her hands covered in blood, telling them about the power it gave her. To understand what happened on Christmas Day 2013, you have to go back 5 months to July 18th of that same year, because this wasn't the first time Melissa Young had attacked Alan Williamson. It was the second. Melissa Young was born Richard McCabe in Perth, Scotland in 1977. Growing up, she experienced what's now understood as gender dysphoria, the profound discomfort of living in a body that doesn't match your internal sense of who you are. In the 1980s and 1990s, there was little understanding or acceptance of transgender identity in Scotland. Wearing female clothing led to severe bullying, verbal and physical abuse that shaped a personality marked by paranoia and defensiveness. In 2002, at age 25, she underwent gender reassignment surgery and legally became Melissa Young. But the trauma of those early years, combined with other challenges, had taken their toll. By 2013, Melissa was struggling with severe substance abuse issues. She drank heavily. She used cannabis daily. She inhaled solvents, substances like glue or paint thinner that produce a dangerous high. She'd used heroin. She was on 14 different prescription medications for mental health conditions. She'd worked as a sex worker in Edinburgh, employed at a sauna. Her former boss would later tell police that the other women who worked there were frightened of Melissa. She had an inferiority complex that manifested as aggression. She started fights. She was unpredictable. By 2013, she was no longer working regularly, living in her Glenure Lane flat, spiraling deeper into addiction and mental health crisis. Alan Williamson was 47 years old, lived in the same building, and had some kind of relationship with Melissa, the exact nature of which remains unclear. Neighbors, acquaintances, perhaps friends, at least initially, but the relationship had become strained, toxic, dangerous. On July 18, 2013, Melissa accused Alan of stealing her house keys. There's no evidence he actually took them, but Melissa believed he had, and in her paranoid state, that belief became certainty. She confronted him, lured him into her flat, and then locked the door. She wouldn't let him leave. She was holding him against his will. Abduction, in legal terms. Then she produced a knife. A large kitchen knife, the kind with a 6-inch blade. She waved it at Alan, brandished it, made clear she was capable of using it. Alan was terrified. He was trapped in a flat with someone who was clearly unstable, clearly dangerous, holding a weapon. In desperation, seeing no other way out, Alan did something remarkable. He ran to the balcony of the first-floor flat, 1 story up from ground level, and jumped. He leapt from the balcony down to the garden below, willing to risk injury rather than stay in that flat with Melissa and her knife. He survived the jump, he escaped, and he reported the incident to police. Melissa Young was charged with abduction and assault. The case was working its way through the Scottish legal system. She was awaiting trial for that July incident when Christmas 2013 came around. Think about that for a moment. Alan Williamson knew Melissa Young was dangerous. He'd jumped from a first-floor balcony to escape her 5 months earlier. She'd been charged with a crime against him. And yet, on Christmas Day, he went to her flat when she invited him. Perhaps he felt obligated. Perhaps he thought the holiday spirit would make things better. Perhaps he believed she'd changed, or that giving her a chance was the right thing to do. Whatever his reasoning, it was a fatal mistake. Christmas Day, 2013. The exact time Alan arrived at Melissa's flat isn't recorded, but it was sometime in the afternoon. She had presents for him, the unisex trainers, the sun calendar. She handed them to him. Alan looked at the gifts and rejected them. The reasons why aren't entirely clear. Perhaps he found the calendar inappropriate. It was known for featuring scantily clad models. Perhaps he simply didn't want gifts from her given their history. Perhaps he was uncomfortable being in her flat at all and wanted to leave quickly. Whatever his reason, he said no thank you, and he tried to go. Melissa wouldn't let him leave. Just like in July, she blocked his exit. She locked the door. Alan was trapped again, in the same flat where he'd been held 5 months earlier. History repeating itself in the worst possible way. At some point during this confrontation, Alan managed to call 999, the UK equivalent of 911. The call was recorded. On the recording, you can hear Alan in the background shouting, "Let me out! Let me out!" But he couldn't speak directly to the emergency operator. Melissa must have been preventing him from getting to the phone, or he couldn't reach it while trying to escape. The operator could hear the shouting, but couldn't understand what was happening. Was it a domestic disturbance? An argument? The call was concerning but not immediately clear as a life-threatening emergency. Police were dispatched, but not with the urgency that might have saved Alan's life. Then Melissa herself called 999. This was her first call. She reported that her neighbor wouldn't leave her flat. She was claiming that Alan was the problem, that he was the one causing trouble, that she needed help removing him from her property. The complete opposite of reality. Alan was trying desperately to leave, and she was preventing him. Melissa was at 6 feet 3 inches tall. Alan was an average-height man. She had a significant physical advantage, and she had access to weapons. In her kitchen, within easy reach, was a 6-inch kitchen knife. What happened next occurred with brutal speed. Melissa attacked Alan with that knife. She stabbed him repeatedly, not once or twice in a moment of rage, but 29 times, 12 stab wounds to the left side of his chest, 12 to his left upper arm, 5 to his left leg. Multiple wounds so deep they damaged his ribs, penetrated his diaphragm, injured his left lung and his heart. The largest wound measured 7.3 centimeters by 3.8 centimeters, almost 3 inches long. This wasn't a brief, impulsive attack. 29 stab wounds take time. They require sustained violence, continued intent to harm. This was a sustained, brutal assault that left Alan no chance of survival. After the attack, Melissa made a second 999 call. This time, she told the truth. She reported that she had stabbed Alan Williamson at her flat on Glenure Lane. She told them to come quickly, and she made a strange request. "I'm psychiatric. Can you take me to Royal Edinburgh Hospital, please?" Police arrived within minutes. When they knocked on the door of the Glenure Lane flat, Melissa answered. Her hands were covered in blood. Inside the flat, just behind the front door, Alan Williamson lay dead. The knife was in the kitchen where she'd left it after the attack. When officers asked her what happened, Melissa gave a chilling response. "The power it gave me was amazing. I have severe mental health issues. I need to go to Carstairs." Carstairs is Scotland's state hospital for mentally disordered offenders, essentially a high-security psychiatric facility. She was already thinking about where she'd be sent, about building a defense of mental illness. She told the officers, "We've been friends for ages, but this has been coming for ages." That statement revealed something crucial. This wasn't a sudden snap. This wasn't an unexpected explosion of violence. According to Melissa's own words, this has been coming for ages. She'd been building toward this. The July incident was a preview, and Alan's rejection of her Christmas gifts was simply the trigger for something she'd already been contemplating. Melissa Young was arrested on December 27, 2013, and charged with murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Alan's body, her confession, the knife, the 999 calls. There was no question she'd killed him. The only question was the legal characterization of that killing. In Scottish law, there's a distinction between murder and culpable homicide. Murder requires malice aforethought, intent to kill or cause serious harm. Culpable homicide is a lesser charge, often applied when there's diminished responsibility due to mental impairment. If Melissa could prove she was so mentally ill at the time of the killing that she couldn't form proper intent, she might be convicted of the lesser charge with a shorter sentence that became her defense strategy. Claim diminished responsibility. Argue that mental illness had driven her actions. Frame the killing as a tragedy caused by psychiatric crisis rather than a deliberate murder. The trial began in August 2014 at the High Court in Livingston, one of Scotland's major criminal courts. Melissa offered to plead guilty to culpable homicide by reason of abnormality of mind. But the Crown, Scotland's prosecution service, rejected that plea. They believed this was murder, pure and simple, and they intended to prove it. The defense presented psychiatric testimony. Dr. Michael Caine, a psychiatrist who'd examined Melissa, testified that she had multiple mental health issues. She was on 14 prescription medications. She had a severe personality disorder. She was abusing alcohol, cannabis, solvents, and heroin. On the morning before the murder, she'd smoked heroin. Dr. Caine testified that Melissa had told him she wanted to be called Chloe, suggesting she believed she had multiple personalities. She claimed she'd been possessed during the attack. She described seeing a very bright light and hearing voices in her head telling her to attack Alan. The defense argued this was evidence of psychosis, of a complete break from reality. How could someone experiencing such severe delusions be held fully responsible for murder? But the prosecution's psychiatric experts disagreed. Yes, Melissa had mental health issues. Yes, she had substance abuse problems. Yes, she had a personality disorder. But none of that meant she couldn't form intent to kill. None of that meant she didn't know what she was doing when she picked up that knife and stabbed Alan Williamson 29 times. The prosecution pointed to telling details. After the killing, Melissa had called 999 and asked to be taken to a psychiatric hospital. That showed calculation. That showed she understood what she'd done and was already planning her defense. When police interviewed her, she spoke rationally about her mental health issues, about her need for treatment. This wasn't someone in the grip of uncontrollable psychosis. And there was her own statement to police. The power it gave me was amazing. That wasn't the statement of someone who didn't understand their actions. That was someone who had enjoyed the act of violence, who had felt empowered by taking another person's life. The jury also heard about the July incident, how Melissa had abducted and assaulted Alan before, how he'd been so terrified he'd jumped from a balcony to escape her. That showed a pattern. This wasn't an isolated break from reality. This was escalating violence against the same victim. Perhaps most damning was testimony from PC Pamela Leishman, one of the officers who'd responded to the scene. She testified that after the killing, Melissa had said, "Melissa didn't help with prayers last night. I don't normally stab someone." That last phrase, "I don't normally stab someone," was crucial. It showed awareness that stabbing someone was abnormal, wrong. It showed she understood the moral and legal implications of her actions. There was also the testimony about a curry delivery. 2 hours before Alan died, a takeaway driver named Matthew Hutchison had tried to deliver a chicken korma to Melissa's flat. When he knocked, she opened the door but called herself Chloe and claimed she hadn't ordered food. She told him to fuck off and to tell his bosses to stop harassing her. But minutes later, she called the restaurant and said the curry was actually meant for Alan Williamson, her neighbor, and asked them to deliver it to him instead. This showed she was aware of Alan's presence in her building, was thinking about him, was perhaps already planning to lure him to her flat under the pretense of giving him food or Christmas presents. The trial lasted 5 days. On August 16th, 2014, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty of murder. They rejected the defense's plea of diminished responsibility. They concluded that Melissa Young had known exactly what she was doing when she killed Alan Williamson. Judge Lord Boyd sentenced her to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years before she could apply for parole. In his sentencing remarks, he was scathing about her defense. "Having murdered him," Lord Boyd said, "you set about trying to persuade health professionals that you were suffering from diminished responsibility. While it's true that you have a severe personality disorder, it's clear it played no part in what happened that night." He continued, "You showed no remorse. In fact, you told this court that you were indifferent to his death." Indifferent. That was the word Melissa had used during the trial when asked about her feelings regarding Alan's death. Not guilty. Not regretful. Not horrified by what she'd done. Indifferent. Lord Boyd also noted that during the trial, Melissa had told the court that if Alan had just accepted her Christmas presents, she wouldn't have stabbed him. That admission destroyed any argument about diminished responsibility. It showed clear cause and effect in her mind. It showed she knew her actions were connected to his refusal of the gifts. It showed intent, awareness, choice. "You were convicted of a cruel and wicked attack," Lord Boyd concluded, making clear that the court saw this as a calculated murder, not a tragic accident caused by mental illness. Melissa Young was sent to HMP Cornton Vale in Stirling, Scotland's only all-female prison. But her violence didn't stop with her conviction. In 2014, just months after being imprisoned, she attacked a female prison officer. The assault was brutal. Melissa lunged at the officer, grabbed her by the hair, and pulled her to the ground. She climbed on top of the officer and bit her in the stomach hard enough to draw blood. The defense argued that her transgender identity and mental health issues should be considered as mitigation. Despite this, she received an additional 6 months added to her sentence. She would go on to assault another female prison officer during her incarceration. The pattern of violence that had started with Alan Williamson continued behind bars, raising serious questions about prison placement policies and the safety of staff and inmates. Alan Williamson's death remains a tragedy made more painful by its preventability. He'd already been victimized by Melissa once. He'd reported it to police. Charges had been filed. The legal system was aware that she was dangerous to him specifically, and yet, 5 months later, she was still free when Christmas Day came around, able to lure him to her flat one final time. Would he have lived if the July assault case had been processed more quickly? If he'd been given more protection? If he'd simply refused to go to her flat that day? The answer to all those questions is probably yes. But he went. And Melissa killed him. And the reason given, that he rejected a pair of trainers and a calendar, seems so disproportionate to the response that it's almost impossible to comprehend. The case raised uncomfortable questions about several issues: mental health treatment and substance abuse support, the assessment of dangerousness and risk, the speed of the justice system in processing assault cases, the placement of violent offenders in prison. All of these factors intersected in ways that led to Alan Williamson's death and to Melissa Young spending at least the next 20 years in prison. Melissa Young became eligible to apply for parole in 2034, 20 years after her conviction. Whether she'll ever be released depends on the parole board's assessment of the risk she poses to public safety. Given her attacks on prison staff, that release seems unlikely. Alan Williamson, meanwhile, is remembered by those who knew him not for how he died, but for who he was. A man who made the mistake of trying to maintain neighborly relations with someone who'd already shown herself to be dangerous. A man who perhaps believed in second chances. A man who didn't deserve to die over Christmas presents. The Christmas gifts case reminds us that domestic violence and neighborhood disputes can escalate with terrifying speed, that prior incidents are often warning signs we ignore at our peril, and that mental health crises don't excuse violence even when they explain it. The Scottish legal system drew a clear line. Melissa Young knew what she was doing, chose to do it, and must be held accountable for taking a life over something as trivial as rejected presents. This is part of the Christmas series, cases where the holiday season became a backdrop for tragedy. Alan Williamson should have been opening presents, eating Christmas dinner, enjoying the day. Instead, a neighbor's rage and a pattern of escalating violence cut his life short. So here's what haunts me about this case. Do you think the July assault should have been processed faster? Could Alan's death have been prevented if Melissa had been in custody awaiting trial? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I actually read them, and this case raises real questions about how we assess danger and protect victims. If you're into this kind of storytelling, the full investigation plus the human story, subscribe for more.